In 1930, France began construction on the Maginot Line, a series of concrete fortifications, obstacles, and weapon installations along the French-German border. It was the most sophisticated defensive structure in the history of warfare at that point. The engineering was extraordinary. The planning was thorough. The strategic logic was coherent. The same frontal assault across the French-German border that had cost France 1.3 million soldiers in World War I would be made prohibitively expensive by permanent fortifications, forcing any future German attack into either a frontal assault on an impenetrable defense or a flanking maneuver that France would have time to respond to. In May 1940, Germany invaded France. They went around the Maginot Line, through the Ardennes forest, terrain that French military planners had classified as impassable for armored vehicles. The Maginot Line worked exactly as designed. The sectors it defended were not breached. The plan failed because the enemy didn't attack the plan. This is the specific failure mode that makes careful plans dangerous. The plan's very solidity, the confidence produced by thoroughness, the certainty generated by rigor, can make the planners less capable of imagining the thing they haven't planned for. The most dangerous plans are not the careless ones. The most dangerous plans are the ones that have been so carefully constructed that the people inside them develop a specific and justified confidence in the plan's robustness, a confidence that becomes the mechanism by which the plan fails. The French military's analysis of the Ardennes was not uninformed. They had studied the terrain. They had consulted engineers. The conclusion that armored divisions could not move through the Ardennes at operational speed was based on real analysis of real terrain by competent people. What the analysis didn't adequately account for was the possibility that German military engineering would advance faster than French defensive planning, and that what was impassable in 1936 would become passable by 1940 through specific innovations in armor coordination, logistics, and radio communication that the French planners were aware of in general, but hadn't incorporated into their specific terrain assessments. The planning process that produced the Maginot Line was designed to answer the question, how do we defend against the most likely attack? It was not designed to answer the question, what are the ways our defense could fail that our current planning assumptions make us unable to see? These are different questions, and they produce different analyses. And organizations under time and resource pressure almost always ask the first one. The second question is harder to ask because it requires the planners to take their own confidence out of the equation, to assume temporarily that the things they are most certain about are the things most likely to be wrong, specifically because the certainty itself may have reduced the scrutiny applied to them. Gary Klein's pre-mortem technique, referenced in an earlier episode, is the closest organizational equivalent. Assume the plan has failed, and then ask what the failure reveals about the assumptions that were never fully tested. The Maginot Line's pre-mortem would have required French planners to ask, given that this structure is working exactly as designed, how are the Germans attacking us anyway? That question, asked in 1936, might have surfaced the Ardennes vulnerability. Have you ever been part of a plan that was so thoroughly developed that the thoroughness itself made it harder to question? Where the rigor of the process felt like proof that the plan was sound? Leave a comment. The specific cognitive mechanism behind the most dangerous plans is well documented in organizational research and goes by several names: the planning paradox, escalating commitment, or in its most precise formulation, the phenomenon of confident fragility. Confident fragility describes the specific condition of a system that is highly optimized for the expected scenario and extremely vulnerable to scenarios outside the optimization envelope. The more thoroughly a plan has been optimized for a specific set of conditions, the more dependent it becomes on those conditions actually obtaining, and the more dangerous any deviation from those conditions becomes. A loosely constructed plan with acknowledged uncertainties has, paradoxically, a kind of resilience that a tightly constructed plan lacks. The people executing it expect the unexpected, maintain adaptive capacity, and are not shocked when conditions deviate from the plan. A tightly constructed plan trains the people inside it to expect the expected, to optimize for the planned conditions, and to experience deviations as implementation problems rather than as signals that the plan needs revision. The financial models built by major banks ahead of the 2008 crisis exhibited this pattern. They were extraordinarily sophisticated, built by teams with the highest quantitative credentials, tested against decades of historical data, stress-tested against scenarios that the teams considered extreme. The scenarios they hadn't modeled were the ones that hadn't occurred in the historical data the models were built on. Specifically, the scenario of a nationwide decline in U.S. home prices. Home prices had never declined nationally, simultaneously, since the Great Depression. The models were, therefore, not designed to handle a nationwide simultaneous decline. The models were not unsophisticated. They were confidently fragile, optimized for the conditions that historical data supported, and catastrophically exposed to the specific condition that historical data had never required them to model. If the specific mechanics of confident fragility, why the most thorough plans create the most dangerous vulnerabilities, is the level of analysis you come for, the like is the direct signal. The historical examples cluster around a specific finding. The failures that produce the most catastrophic outcomes are almost never the failures of careless, improvised plans. They are the failures of careful, thorough, extensively analyzed plans that had been executed in conditions that deviated from the planning envelope in a specific way the planners were not prepared to recognize. The Maginot Line didn't fail because the French military was careless. It failed because 15 years of extraordinarily careful defensive planning had produced an institution so confident in its analysis of German attack vectors that the possibility of German armor moving through the Ardennes was by 1940 functionally invisible to the people who would have needed to respond to it. Theranos' internal analysis, however corrupted by the specific dynamics of deception documented in an earlier episode, produced a set of results that the people inside the organization had convinced themselves were accurate. The analysis was not casual. It was extensive, internally consistent, and supported by a substantial investment in the infrastructure that the analysis required. The confidence produced by that investment was the thing that made the deviation from reality invisible to the people closest to it. Nokia's platform analysis, the assessments of Symbion's competitive position that led to the resource allocation decisions in 2004 and 2006, was careful, technically informed, and produced by people with genuine expertise. The confidence produced by that expertise was the thing that made the specific threat from iOS difficult to process with the urgency it required. The most dangerous plans feel the most solid because they are the most solid, within the envelope of conditions they were designed for. The practical response to confident fragility is not to make plans less rigorous. Rigorous planning is valuable, and the alternative, improvised decision-making under pressure, is reliably worse. The practical response is to separate the planning process into two distinct phases with two different questions. The first phase, the standard planning process, asks, given what we know and what we expect, what is the best approach? This phase produces the plan. The second phase, the adversarial audit, asks, what would have to be true for this plan to fail in a way that our planning process has made us unable to see? This phase does not improve the plan. It identifies the plan's confident fragility envelope, the specific conditions outside which the plan's solidity becomes a liability. The Maginot Line's adversarial audit would have asked, what would have to be true about German military capability for our terrain assessment to be wrong? The 2008 banking model's adversarial audit would have asked, What historical assumption are these models most dependent on that has the least recent validation? Nokia's adversarial audit in 2004 would have asked, what would have to be true about the mobile device market for our platform investment decision to be wrong in a way we currently cannot see? These questions are available in real time before the failure. They require no information that isn't already in the room. What they require is a willingness to assume temporarily that the confidence the planning process has produced is the specific thing making a specific failure likely. Most planning processes contain no mechanism for generating that willingness. The people who conducted the rigorous analysis are the people who would have to question the rigor. The people who have the most confidence in the plan are the people who have the best reasons for that confidence. And those reasons make the adversarial question feel unnecessary. The next episode looks at what happens when that question gets asked too late, when the failure has already begun, and the people inside it are trying to decide whether the evidence they're seeing is a signal or noise. This content was developed with the support of artificial intelligence tools and underwent human review, editorial curation, and approval before publication. The analysis presented here is strictly educational and philosophical in nature, grounded in behavioral psychology and classical stoicism.